Good morning. Wow. Coronation of the slave. When is a slave given a crown? And what can that teach us about Torah and your relationship with Hashem? What you find meaning in? What does it mean that, in a sense, the Jewish people, the founding moment, good morning, the founding moment of the Jewish people as a nation was in virtue of the fact that they were slaves to Pare, to Pharaoh. Interestingly, Rashi points out that their servitude was only with respect to a certain quota of work that they had to do. Good morning. But that they didn't actually attain the status of slaves, because a slave loses a certain status. And remember, it's interesting that Hagar left her noble background, which she was a princess. She left that in order to be a slave, a shifra to Abraham. There's something fascinating. I'm jumping around, but there's something fascinating in this week's parsha that we just lay in, Parshas V'yigash. Spoke about how Shimon, one of Jacob's children, Simon, married his sister, Dinah. Now, according to Kabbalah, it makes sense because Dinah is judgment and Shimon is like a warrior type. And he represents him and Levi. Levi is also Gvura. There's a din associated. My fingers are yellow, forgive me. My highlighter exploded over my pages and my hands. That will segue me nicely into today's thoughts, okay? Sunrise in my study, simple genius. Okay, I had a conversation with Rabbi Wagner just this Shabbos about the simple genius of the Rebbe in answering the question of how Shimon can marry his sister, not just his half-sister. It was his full sister. This was not even permitted to any person at the time, not just the chosen nation, but anybody. Nobody could do this. So how did he do it? This is what Rashi says, right? Rashi writes like this. When Shimon killed Shechem, who captured Dinah, Dinah did not want to go out of her servitude in that city where there was no males left in, and it was about to be gutted of everything, until Shimon swore that he would marry her. They had a child called Shaul ben Haknanis. I don't know who the father of that child was. If it was Shem or Shimon, I don't really know, but someone fill me in on that. So that would be interesting to know. I always assumed that she got pregnant with Shem, that's why she didn't want to leave. But that's not what Rashi says. The Rebbe has an incredible interpretation of why she didn't want to leave. This was a very broken person who was abducted and humiliated and then kept imprisoned and married against her will. She was made into a slave. That is a spiritual lesson for you. It's descriptive of what the Rebbe describes as the opportunity for us to be God's nation, to have this betrothal ceremony to God only in virtue of the fact that we were in servitude in Egypt. God came to redeem us on that we've already attained that sort of degradation. So now we become God's slave. And what happens when we become God's slave? Eved Melech Melech. Coronation of the king's slave. God crowns the slave. Good morning. God crowns the slave. The Jewish people were crowned at Matan Torah when we had the complete moment of betrothal to God and the nation becomes completely formed. When he took us out from Exodus, we were all already devoted. We were like that. We went on the shidduch already. And now it's all there. It's engaged to be engaged. No, actually, that would probably be considered the engagement party, because the betrothal is marriage. It's a commitment of marriage, but not the experience of marriage. We had the commitment to marriage at Matan Torah, but it wasn't all revealed. The experience of marriage, when you can actually have a meaningful relationship with God in an experiential way, that you feel it in your basar, Raya kabasar, we're going to all see godliness. So that's a very intimate relationship with God that you don't need to just have a commitment, but rather experience it. I'm saying as a preparation for that, we have to try to have some experiential Judaism now. That's called Hispaninus, primarily. Okay, but there's also different mindsets that you could like have in mind while you're working in, I don't know what, flipping flapjacks. There's probably meditations for flipping flapjacks. There should be. If there isn't, there should be. And I think it's a very big problem if there is not. Anything you do has to be some expression of a meaningful relationship with whatever you call God. I think my car radio is on. That's distracting. That is annoying as well as distracting. Okay. So how could Shimon marry his sister? I didn't get them. Oh no, I'm out of batteries. Oh no. I didn't look up the Medrash yet. I read this entire Gurarya on this Rashi. The Rashi says she didn't want to leave. He writes a whole explanation how he can marry his sister. He says, the Gurarya on this Rashi, that Shimon was like, it was a Ruach HaKodesh moment. Yaakov didn't allow his children to marry Knanis, according to one opinion. He didn't. But Avram didn't let his children, Yitzchak should not marry a Knanis. Everyone was so makbeh, so particular about this, that they had a sense of Ruach HaKodesh. They had Holy Spirit tell them what to do. Because the Torah was all generated that way in that time, before giving the Torah. It was all through Ruach HaKodesh. They knew what to do in virtue of being good people, being totally in line with God. So they knew what to do. They knew when they can marry Shifchus. Yitzchak did not. He knew he did not, was not able to. He was an Eilat Tmima. He was totally devoted just to God. He was the chosen one. We're going to call Yitzchak Avinu. He's going to save us on Judgment Day, in our version of Judgment Day. Okay, I'm running out of batteries in the iPad, so I want to just review these thoughts for a minute, these haikus. Sunrise in my study, simple genius. So I want to say that the Rebbe's simple genius is coming up an answer. He doesn't have to say it was Ruach HaKodesh, like the Gurarya says. He knew what to do. He knew that in this case he was allowed to, just like Eliyahu and Har Carmel. You knew you can offer a sacrifice outside the Holy Temple. He knew, because he had Ruach HaKodesh. So too here. He knew he could marry his sister. And how did the whole world? Hashem created the world with chesed, the kindness of allowing the impossible to happen. They had to marry their sisters. Chesed yibana. It's called a chesed. To be able to. So Yaakov had this in the same situation. His children were a special thing. They were like the first people in the world. They only can marry amongst themselves. In certain cases, they had to marry their sisters. They had to marry Shifkas. They were accomplishing certain things. They had to have certain amount of tribes to generate what was meant to be. So they just knew what to do. The Rebbe is simple genius, saying, let's just read in the Yena Shel Torah, the wine of the Torah, in Rashi's words. Just understand in the literal level, what is the Torah telling us? And it's just simple genius. Why didn't she want to leave? She was captured. We know from before in Rashi, it says, the 5-year-old knows this. The Yish B'men Shevi, they captured one Shevi, a Shivcha. They captured, and the Jews conquered, and they captured one Shivcha. Mazel Tov. But how do you know she was a Shivcha? Where does Rashi know this? Where does the Chachamim rather know this? Or the pasuk says, but how do they know that it was a Shivcha? It's called a Shevi, a Shivcha. How do they know? It wasn't a married woman. They killed her. They captured a married woman. Because anyone who's captured in war is a shivcha, is a slave, a maidservant. When Dinah was captive there in Shechem, even though Shechem was killed, just being there in the environment of your servitude until you're taken out of the house of servitude in Egypt, until Dinah was taken out of Shechem, where she was in servitude, she was a slave, and a slave has no yichus. She's considered kinyan kasplay, money. She is considered property, an asset, money. And in virtue of being money, she has no yichus, no connection. She's like an animal. You can take them wherever you want. That's what a slave is. There's this positive thing to a slave too, because the Jewish people are slaves to God. So what does that mean? We're not criticizing what it is to be a slave. We're not putting down any people that feel like they're enslaved in their life. It's actually telling you that Eved Melech, we'll see how. Dinah did not want to leave because she wanted to have a connection with someone. And she was only wanted to be amongst the Jewish people. She knew it was meant to be captured by Shem and Goyish, a Gentile way of life, completely foreign to her. And she begged that she wanted to be part of the Jewish family. So the only way she could do this, being a genius and a maverick and an incredible, powerful lady who was 5 years old, I think, a young lady, she knew that she had to stay in servitude in order to have no yichus, because she was kinyan kasbeh. She was property. She had no relations with her parents or anything. Now she was completely just property, and Shimon could therefore acquire her, and therefore she would grow up and be actually crowned by Shimon. Like God crowns the Jewish people his slave. Look at the beautiful words we say in the Shacharis Tefillah on Shabbos. Yismach Moshe matnas chalkei. Moshe rejoices in the gift of his portion. Ki eved neman karas alei. Because he is called a faithful slave. Eved means slave, it does not mean servant. But you can still call it servant in one sense, and I finally found the source. In virtue of the fact that the servitude of the Jewish people was only with respect to serving physically, but not in terms of their bodies. The Jewish people's wives, the Jewish women were not conquered. They weren't put to humiliating acts. They would maintain their integrity with their relationships with their husbands. But a woman who is literally a slave has no relationships whatsoever. So Dinah was married. She was never divorced. Her husband was killed, and therefore she maintained, by being in the place of her husband's property, she maintained the status until you acquire the property. So Shimon had to marry her to be acquired. If she went free, she would revert back to being a regular woman, and he couldn't have married Shimon, and she couldn't have married any of her brothers in a fully proper way. And here she knew that she could in this way, which is like a genius, simple genius of the Rebbe. Just tell me what Rashi told me before. I didn't even need to tell you again. V'yish b'meni shavi, it's a shifcha. Now I know later that once you're captured, you're considered a slave. And a slave has no relationships, and Shimon can marry his own sister in virtue of that moment. What does that teach us about our relationship with God? What is that going to do for you? That's nice history from the people who don't believe that it's true, chas v'chalila, or just a nice teaching if it's a drash. What does it mean to be practical to you? The Rebbe is teaching you ways to actually live godliness, to become infinite. Sometimes it's a recognition and meditation. Okay, but it goes on to say, Chlil Tiferes Bereishna Satalei. We say in our prayer on a Saturday morning, you have placed upon his head, you have given upon his head a golden crown. That's an Eved Neman. God gives his faithful servant Moshe. I'm standing before you on Mount Sinai when the Jewish people as a whole were betrothed to God, and we were at this coronation. And we were all crowned, actually, with two crowns. One in virtue of saying Nasa, and one for Nishma. We're going to do it first. I'm your slave, God. I'll do whatever you say. In that sense, we're slaves to God. And it's a beautiful thing. And then that's when you become, when you're the tail of the lion, he raises you up above his head and gives you a crown. You become his crown, the precious. You become the precious. In the marriage contract, in his one hand, in his right hand, Moshe takes down 2 tablets, which were cubes, miraculously carried. Because he couldn't carry it with one hand later, once the Jewish people sinned. But when we had a relation of integrity with our beloved God, then it was miraculously carried. You just lifted, like Yaakov was walking back. Was it from Haran? And then his legs just lifted up because he has meaningful experience of life. He has a relationship with God. Okay, it talks about Shabbos there. That's why we're dealing on Shabbos about that. Because it's taught in the Torah. So we have the coronation of the king's slave. You become a king. Every Jew becomes a king in virtue of accepting a moment of avdus, of deference, of the Rebbe calls it Kabbalas El. Okay, so let's see what. So okay, this is what the Rebbe says we can learn from this. This is the simple genius of the Rebbe. That's when it's a simple genius, when you go to Pshut Shel Mikra and bring out the Yena Shel Torah, the simple aspect of the Torah, the literal story, has all the images and characters and circumstances are imbued with infinite meaning. That's what the Torah is, because God's a pretty smart, simple genius author. But he brings it out through his slaves, his servants, the Rebbe. So he explains what it means to be a slave. A slave, since you are kinyan kaspa, you are an asset, and anything you acquire, if something lands in your hand, you get showered with $1 million. Someone robs the bank and he puts it in your pocket. If you were God's slave, God owns that. If you were a slave and that was done, your master would immediately own it. It's not that you have to give it to the king, to your master. It's automatically his in virtue of it going into your hand. You don't exist. This is what it means to be an eved, a servant of God. That you don't exist in this sense. That you are totally a vehicle of God. So when someone gives you $1 zillion, and all you got to say is, God, this is yours. So God said, yeah, I know that's why it came to you. So we can enjoy it together. I wanted you to have this. I'm crowning you. Because you're giving to me, I'm giving back. Klil Teferes Bereishah Nasatali, God gives it back. God coronates the Eved, Ne'eman, the faithful slave. Okay, so the Rebbe says, prior to the Exodus, we were already God's child. You're God's child. You're his son, you're his daughter. But only after going out of Mitzrayim, that's when we were coming out from Egypt, the Exodus from Egypt, we were called slaves. We're also called Tzivas Hashem, the soldiers of God, which those soldiers are willing to give their very lives. It's a deeper type of servitude, a soldier. Tzivas Hashem. But here in general, a slave is someone who doesn't recognize their own mitzias, their own existence, their own desires. It's about saying, I know I have my own desires. I give them all to you as a gift. I want what you want. I'm going to give everything to you. In distinction from what we were prior to coming out from Egypt, prior from the Exodus of Egypt, we were God's children, which means you identify with your father, and your father identifies with you. So your successes, your devotion to your father, since you identify with him, is your love for him is based on your own desire. It's yesh misha ayev. There is someone there who loves. So therefore, serving God out of love has this drawback of it's not complete selfless devotion. It's I identify with you, God. You're my father. Yes, I want to be a part and I want to sit at your table and fight together, whatever you want. So what does it mean to be a slave? Because a slave, this is when we became also ultimately betrothed to God. And it's an elevation from the slavery, the Hagar, to have a yichud with Hashem. And Hagar herself, and Dino with Shimon, the same idea. To be a slave, and then therefore being elevated to the level of, we're going to see the Rebbe distinguishes, okay, I don't have the source here actually, it's one of the few books I didn't bring in my car. But it distinguishes a slave from a wife, the higher level of devotion to God. And a wife also, whatever she acquires goes to her husband, in the same sense that a slave, whatever the slave acquires goes to her master. But it's a deeper connection. It's more resembling the ben, with this child of God who has a connection, and therefore wants to devote. And therefore, anything that I acquire becomes yours, and automatically, we are one. We're totally one. There's a yichud. So that's an elevation over a shifcha, a slave, someone there's an elevation of Rachel and Leah over Zilpah and Bilhah, who the maidservants. How did they marry Yaakov? They were also sisters. Yaakov married 2 sets of sisters. How did they do it? You can tell me Ruach HaKodesh all day. The Rebbe is simple genius again. Since Rachel and Leah is very complicated. Rachel and Leah is because he had a debt to Lavan. It's very complicated. I could say it quick, but you won't understand if you're new. And I got to speak. It's just really fascinating. Okay, a little bit. There were 2 levels of the connection that the patriarchs had with God. One was the Taryag mitzvahs, the 613 mitzvahs that they were going to have, as a nation, going to accept later. And then there was the general 7 rules that govern all humanity, which was called the principles of the children of Noach, the Noachide laws. So for the Noachide laws were incumbent upon them in a top degree priority. Only when they were all satisfied could they therefore do the Taryag mitzvahs, the 613 mitzvahs, which were likened to rabbinical injunctions for us today. That's the degree of prominence that they had. So when it conflicted, when one of the rules is you have to follow systems of government and justice and ethics. So therefore, when you commit to marry someone, even when you're tricked, you have to follow through. Yaakov was tricked to marry Leah. He wanted to marry Rachel. Turns out the veil is uplifted, and then it's Leah there. The morning she was Leah. But he had to follow through his commitment. He couldn't even divorce her in a sense. So he had to follow through, even though he couldn't have married 2 sisters as a rabbinical. But when the biblical incumbency is present, it takes priority over the rabbinical. So he couldn't have fulfilled the later mitzvah that's going to be the 613, not to marry sisters. Whereas half sisters, you could marry as a ben Noach, if it's from the father. So that's Rachel and Leah, I believe. And Zilpah and Bilhah were slaves. So in virtue, they don't have any yichus. They don't have any relationships, any pedigree. They're considered like property, and therefore he can marry sisters. Yaakov was able to marry that pair of sisters also. Pair of sisters also. So here in this sikha, the Rebbe distinguishes 2 levels, but I'm saying a child, the love that he has and serves his father because he connects with his father, which is more out of love, that's analogous to what the Rebbe says in a different place of the relationship between a wife, Isha Kshera, Esritz and Baila, who devotes herself to her husband. That devotion is similar to the child here in the sense that there's a connection with the father or the husband, similarly, that makes one want to do it out of love, whereas a slave does it out of servitude, of deference, of respect and fear even. But that, the Rebbe says, is the foundation of our divine service, and therefore at the founding moment of the Jewish people as a nation, that had to happen first. Oh, actually there you see the reverse order. We were children first. But we weren't founded as a nation until later. Okay, so they both work. The foundation moment. Later, we were actually betrothed, and then we're going to have the experiential relationship with God when Mashiach comes. And I'm telling you, we have to work on that now. The Rebbe says, you can have the appetizer of it now. You can be infinite now. So the Rebbe says how you accomplish that. And it's a concept that's related to Mashiach. It's called, who comes from David Avdi, who's Nasi Lahem La'elam. King David is also called a slave or a servant, and he is going to be the ruler over you forever. He's in a sense crowned also, isn't he? King David is pretty much crowned by God. But he's called God's servant, God's slave. And so how do we bring about that stage where we're going to see the slave of David becoming the king of the entire world? The Rebbe says, when we ourselves conquer the world. That's how we bring about the ultimate conquering of the world on a national, global level. When you actually have a king on the throne, that's accomplished through us doing that work. And here's another source. I found dozens, and I challenge anyone to tell me that this is not the focus now. We actually have to implement ideas. If we're not doing it, if we're not succeeding, if we're not successful, if we're not healthy, we have to find ways to implement these teachings, not just learn about them. That means you need meditation seminars, you need experts, you need people who have the guts and audacity to say that they have tasted it themselves. Because if there's not a single human being on this planet that is now, after how many years, 20 years or something, seen the fruition of the Rebbe's words, which he called Mashiach now, it was supposed to be immediate and urgent. If there's not a single person on this planet that has said that they've tasted, chas v'chalila, God forbid, I'll tell you what's really happening. Those few people are humble people and they're shy. They can't be like Noach that doesn't pray for success and that the flood waters should be gishmei bracha. He was too abashed, what's the word? Humble to pray for that, but he had the power to do it. And there's no leader, makim she'ein ish. These people have to come to the forefront. I've seen the light. Takak bakadti. Ekia shel ekia. You need a phrase. Wait, I just spilled water everywhere. That's the phrase. The floodwaters, you don't get put down, you go into the teva, you go into the word, the hispaininus, that rises you above the floodwaters, so it becomes gishmei bracha, to be elevated above the entire world, to be balabais over the entire world. Okay, you want a source? Tafshin and Beis, Krach Aleph, page 226 in the top right corner. I said it quickly, so look it up. You conquer the world, you bring a state whereby every Jew conquers the world. You bring everyone with you. You be the first. Don't rely on somebody else. Nobody's making these seminars if you don't see it. I don't see it in front of my face. Another seminar in Chinuch, another thing. Okay, so maybe they're implementing it there. I don't know. I've been bored at every seminar, every talk I've ever been to. I've had enough of people rolling in the cholent. I've had enough of endless nigunim. I want meetings to say, what can I do today different? I did not succeed. I'm the leader of this and this place. I did not succeed. I ask you, those present, please help me figure out what went wrong. People have to be humble enough to say that. Yes, say your successes. Have the audacity of someone who prays for the success in the floodwaters to not conquer to not overcome the world, to save the world. To recognize you have the power to do that, but recognize that when you've not accomplished your goal, to seek someone out that has some resonates with truth. If you think that God didn't give you a single person that can light your path, chas v'shalom. I don't even believe it. I've asked myself, and I've went through all the voices in my head that say, this is representing God on earth. And I said, this person doesn't, this person doesn't, this person doesn't. But you know what? After I counseled out about 80% of the people, 90, 100, there's one or two people that I say, this is a voice that comes from God. Well, how do I know? Because they care about me. That's how you know it's genuine. It's not so, it doesn't have to be contrary to common sense. Just live it. Not be livid. Live it. Eved melech melech. The slave of a king is a king. Find ways to implement that and see whether it works or not. Did you try that for a week? Did you take the Rabbi Boruch Merkur ice bucket challenge? I will put an ice bucket over my head. If someone says, I genuinely tried for a week, I followed all your advice and I did not feel like you're seeing nirvana. Okay? Do it for a week an ice bucket in the head alive. Okay, the challenge still exists. Don't think that I've given up on that. I'm just going to read a few other haikus just because I'm cooling down. And before, I have 1% left in my iPad. We made it to fireworks sky, Roman candle. Originally, those words, Roman candle, was golden scepter, but I wanted the sky lit up image because we had to learn something from even something as ridiculous as New Year's. We have to learn from that. What do you think's going to happen when Mashiach comes? You think we're not going to have fireworks? We'll have that too. There's going to be a New Year's Eve celebration in a kosher way. I promise you. It was called the Sudas of Levias and Sharabar and Yanim and Shimar. Okay, it's a slightly different atmosphere, but we'll have fireworks, I promise you. You'll be on the top of the biggest skyrise, seeing it from over the most beautiful sight of all. And maybe a few angels in the mix. So did you make it? So to me, this is 3 levels. Okay, you got to get somewhere. To make it, you got to try to get there. So that's the first level. It's saying I'm going on a path. And then to fireworks square, that's a ratzah. Your fireworks, you're exploding with your love for Hashem. You just want to go, ah! And okay, so what's that going to accomplish? How are you going to put bread on your table? Roman candle, you have to be the king. You have to hold the scepter. Roman candle sort of looks like a scepter. So I wanted to, originally it was golden scepter. So if you take the golden scepter and conquer the world, not only will you have this ecstasy, which is like, yeah, God, I love you. This is awesome. Who needs drugs when you have God? Because that's what it's going to be. I promise you. It will be analogous to that. I promise you. Immersion experience. It will be the highest tech. Awesome. So the Roman candle here is a scepter in the sense that when you conquer your world, and forget about waving a flag so somebody else could sit on the throne, but when you conquer your world, that's the shaiv. That is taking your ecstasy, your I love you, God, that you're davening, and making say, I want to conquer this world for God. Eved melech melech. It becomes your property. So we're doing this, we're in partnership. You're in cahoots with the guy who's creating the atoms that made the bank that you think that owns everything. Fixing his tie, in the window, fixed eyes. The dove eyes gaze. Okay, that's a romantic moment. That has no drush about that. It's just obviously there's drushes. You think romance and Kabbalah and Torah and Yiddishkeit are not the same thing? If you think that they're different, your romance is avodah zarah. That's what Yaakov did not do when he was working in the fields for 14 years before he married Rachel. There was Yamim Achadim. There was just like days, because his love was, I think it was Be'er Mayim Chaim, who says Yamim Achadim in the sense that he was in love with the Shekhinah. Chas v'chalila, to say he was thinking about Rachel Agashmi. I can't remember the exact words. Physical, chas v'chalila, to say that, he says. And then I come with the interpretation to me saying that that's because he wasn't married yet. But after he's married, of course he should. He was in love with the Shekhinah before he was married. Chas v'shalom, to say he was married, he was in love with a physical person. Chas v'shalom. You shouldn't love your wife. He wasn't married. That's the way I interpret it. If you interpret differently, you're crazy. Not only distorting the Torah, but crazy, literally. Shir Hashirim is the model of having a meaningful religious experience. It's the model for it. When you speak about the Avdus that the Jewish people engendered, and when you speak about Dinah being a Shifcha married to Shimon, and Yaakov marrying 2 Shvachos that were sisters, in virtue of the fact that they were Shvachos, he could marry them, and in virtue of the fact that you submit yourself to Hashem, that means that God crowns you. So I hope you have a good vach and implement that. Don't suffice with learning things. You learned enough. They used to study one mimer 60 times. They would be implementing it. In those days, it meant changing your character to be a good person. In these days, it means changing your character to be a good person. It's usually a decades-long experience. The Rebbe said now things are different. You don't have to go three decades. There's a way to jump to the top. It starts with Avdus. It starts with recognition, deference, and honoring and glorifying God, giving. And it ends, and it's empowered by, and it comes to its fruition by, in our times especially, and the power specifically granted in our times, by conquering the world. So that servitude is expressed by conquering. And if you don't like that yin yang, you don't get Yiddishkeit. You don't understand Judaism. You just don't get it. And then you are, what is a word that I don't like to use, but by definition you are misnagid. You don't get it. The Baal Shem Tov came to teach us that the pnimius of the Torah, the inner dimension of the Torah, the faith of the Torah, the Kabbalah of the Torah, the images of the Torah, the poetry of the Torah, is teachings that are relevant to every single Jew. And in virtue of that, the simplest Jew that was never given calling up to the Torah, to read from the Torah, he becomes on par, in a sense, greater, in virtue of his genuine Judaism at his core, in a sense even greater than the greatest scholar, because the scholar lacks the main thing. He misses the first step of simple servitude and genuine, honest, authentic devotion. That's the simple Jew that the Baal Shem Tov embraced, and that's the servitude that's at the foundation of the Jewish nation, in virtue of which we became a nation. Eved Melech expressed ultimately in our heroes, but that is meant to be a model for us. You don't suffice with being 500 pounds and thinking that you daven nice and learn Torah. It is not enough. I guarantee you that you cannot daven properly if you're not healthy. Why? Because Rambam said so. Be healthy in all ways, and then you will have a genuine, authentic experience, not devotion to God, but also experience of God. That is the key. To conquer is achievable through the foundation of the core of devotion. Love first, and be crowned. And if you're not crowned, you're probably not connecting with the right God. Our God has one of the 13 principles of our faith is that God rewards. We're going to learn, I think, tomorrow about Asar B'Tevis, 10th of Tevis, where we fast. So there's a time for acknowledging the suffering of the Jewish people. But the Rebbe says that at that very moment is the conception of Messiah, the Mashiach. And the 10th of Tevis, this is the Chiddush of the Rebbe, is the conceiving. Later the birth happens on the 9th, but 7 months prior, when it's possible to conceive, you had on the 10th of Tevis, the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av, right? The most horrific day of the Jewish calendar when all the temples are destroyed and everything. That is the culmination. But the beginning is Asar B'Tevis, the 10th of Tevis, which we're going to fast in a couple of days, unless Mashiach comes, and then we're going to celebrate the ultimate celebration. Because the ultimate goodness that underlies, good morning, that underlies the fast days is a day of celebration at its core, when we get the return for all the suffering, all the alleviation and the consolation is finally going to come. The days that the Rebbe yearned for before he was 3 years old, the Rebbe said. He yearned for the day when God will console and take every Jew by the hand. The simple genius of the Rebbe before he was 3 years old. Nar Yisrael ve'aveyu. Okay, guys, have a great week. Good luck. Implement it, live it, conquer. Okay, I'm going to succeed when you do it. I'm going to succeed, and the other guy, your next door neighbor, the friendly Jew, is also going to succeed. We're all going to conquer, and then everyone's going to be happy. So, okay, the Asar B'Tevis preamble is meant to show you the inherent goodness that's particular to that day when Mashiach is conceived. Okay, maybe tomorrow. We'll see if I have time. I got a different schedule now. Sunday is beautiful, but we'll see how we can swing it tomorrow. No one typing anything to this morning? That's not very usual. Let's see. Shalom des Chile. I'm going to read that dude from Chile, okay? That's the best I can translate that. Or you probably think, calling out, I don't know, whatever people say. Okay, so I bid everyone a good week. Have a great day.